Hey guys, today I'm sharing this little hallway cabinet makeover. This is what it looked like when I picked it up from our local thrift store. It came with a few scratches on top, a really dirty inside, and an outdated paint job. First things first, I put it up on my workbench and removed all of the hardware, including the door hinges. Hinges can be a mess to put back on, so I labeled them with a few details, including which one was the top and which one went on bottom, and which way they went. Then I put them in a container with the rest of the hardware. Next, I scrubbed the whole thing down with some crud cutter to make sure that there wasn't anything on the surface to prevent the new paint job from sticking. This thing was pretty gross, and as the spray sat, I could see the spray dripping down and turning brown from all of the gunk on it. So I cleaned it all a couple of times, including a rinse job at the end. Then when it was all dry, I scuff sanded it all down with my favorite little sander. The scuff sanding is just an extra step to make sure the paint sticks really well, especially because I sell this furniture that I paint. Before I got this little sander, I used to scuff sand by hand with just 220 grit sandpaper instead. But man, I sand a lot of furniture, so this little sander has been a game changer for me. When scuff sanding, there is really no need to actually sand it down to bare wood. You just want to remove the shine and dull the surface so the paint has a better chance of holding onto the surface. Since the top had some damage, I sanded it down just a little bit more, trying to sand out those scratches. Then I vacuumed up all of the dust I created and wiped it all down with a tack cloth to remove any remaining dust. These tack cloths are really so amazing at picking up every little single speck of dust and are so much better than using just a lint-free rag. For the next step, and since I wanted to paint a light color, I wanted to make sure that I wouldn't have any bleed-through issues where the wood underneath the paint stains through the paint. So to prevent that, I busted out some bin shellac-based primer and brushed and rolled it all over. Honestly, I completely regretted my decision to brush and roll the primer on. I wish that I would have just taken it outside and sprayed it with some bin shellac in a spray can instead. Even though I used a really nice roller, I still had a lot of texture from the roller, and it honestly just took forever to roll it on instead of spraying it. So next time, I'll be using the spray version of the primer instead. After about an hour, the primer was dry, so I sanded the primer down a bit with 220 grit sandpaper to remove the texture that the roller created. Then I removed the dust again and painted on another coat of primer and let it dry. With the white primer on, I noticed a few seams that were really showing up, so I filled them in with some paintable caulking. I squeezed it on, and then I used my finger to push it into the seams, and then I used a damp rag to remove the excess caulking. Caulking isn't easy to sand down, so I really wanted to get it wiped off before it dried. The caulking just filled in those gaps and makes it look so much better. For the paint, I used a couple of paint colors that I had on hand. I mixed Fusion Mineral Paints Peony and what I had left of their Cathedral Taupe together to create a more muted pink. I mixed them up in my paint sprayer's container, making sure to filter the paint before it went into the container, so I didn't have any debris that could clog the sprayer in there. Then I mixed in some water to thin the paint out a bit. With this sprayer, I don't measure how much paint to water I use. With my cheap paint sprayer, though, I definitely measure the water and paint to make sure that the sprayer can spray it. Fusion Mineral Paint seems to need to be a little bit more thin than other furniture or chalk paints that I use in my sprayer, too. Then I sprayed my cabinet with a few coats of the paint. I let it dry for about 2 hours in between each coat, and I sanded in between each coat to knock down some texture that was left behind. Fusion Mineral Paint is a very durable paint that dries in a matte finish, and technically, it doesn't require a top coat. But if you've seen any of my tutorials in the past, you might notice that I still top coat paints like this just for the extra durability. I mean, if I'm going to go through all of this work, I'm going to do what I can to make the finish be as durable and long-lasting as possible. So after the last coat of paint was dry, I sprayed on 3 separate coats of my favorite clear water-based poly. I also sanded in between the coats of poly with 400 grit sandpaper to make sure the finish was silky smooth when I was done. The next day, I put the cleaned up hinges back on and a new knob. Before I share what this cabinet looks like now, take a second to hit that like and subscribe button. So here's what it looked like before, and here's what it looks like now. Goodbye, old, outdated finish, and hello, modern paint job. You can find links to all of the products and tools that I used for this makeover in the description. Thanks for watching.